my friends, and welcome to the Seeds and Weeds podcast brought to you by Small House Farm. Are you a gardener, a forager, an herbalist? Maybe you're just a little plant curious. You've come to the right place. This is Seeds and Weeds. Howdy, friends. Welcome back to the show. Today's episode is all about dandelions. We're going to be digging into everybody's favorite weed. We are going to be talking about proper identification of the dandelion, harvesting dandelion, the perfect time of year to harvest different parts of the plant. We're going to cover recipes, all the different ways that we can use dandelion flowers and leaves and roots in the kitchen. And then we're taking dandelion into the apothecary, and we are crafting a whole bunch of healing tonics, lotions, and things, magic potions with the dandelion. But before we dig into all of that, Heather, what's going on? What's new at Small House?
Well, we have been busy with a garage renovation, and I shouldn't even call it a garage anymore because we haven't stored our car in this building in many years. It has been our Small House facility for the past 5 or 6 years, but we're converting one whole bay to an order processing area and then one whole bay of the garage to a video and photography studio. So we're really excited about all the new things that this renovation is going to provide for us at Small House, not only the space and organization, but just like the inspiration and the creative environment for those projects.
Well, let's kind of clarify when you say renovation. So we've used a big part of this building already for a storage warehouse. It's where we keep all of our products and books, and we're processing orders out there we have for years. So that's getting updated, upgraded, really rearranged to improve that workflow to make it really nice. But the studio portion, the photography and video studio, that's brand new stuff. That's taken from what was a collection of random things and turned it into a beautiful functioning workspace.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. So we've been working on that really since the weather has broke in February. So for the past couple months, we've been pretty busy on that. And then I just finished and sent out the spring herb boxes. Always got to mention that, but that really it lies a huge reason in why we're talking about dandelion today.
Yeah, those spring herb boxes really do connect to the dandelion. So that is our plant of the month right now that we're discussing over in the Patreon. So we're really digging into dandelion over there quite a bit throughout the entire month. And in the boxes that you sent out, the trading card, you do a different herbal trading card for every season, and this one featured dandelion.
Yeah, so in each season for the past, year and a half, we put a different herbal trading card in each box. So it's been kind of a cool surprise for these patrons to see what herb is next, and then we focus on that plant throughout the season, and dandelion is the one for spring. Speaking of the Patreon, we have a couple shout outs that we need to give to the new members and the people that have joined.
Oh, yep. So these are the folks that have joined Patreon just since the last episode. We have got Greg Dardis, Jill Gashow, Sue Burgesson, Ruth, Jane Murphy, and Michelle Markovic. Thank you all so much to all of you that I just named and everybody that's a member of our Patreon community. Thank you all so much for being with us in the community. You know, it's so nice to have your support. And, the folks that are in our Patreon, that support is what allows us to do so many of the great things we do here at Small House Farm, including this podcast. So if you enjoy the podcast and if you like Small House Farm, if you're a fan and you want to support the work that we do, consider joining our community on Patreon. You can find a link to our Patreon and so much more over on our website, which is seedsandweedspodcast.com.
There's a certain kind of plant that follows us, not the rare ones we seek out, not the delicate ones we tend in neat rows, but the ones that show up uninvited and stay anyway. Dandelion is one of those plants. It grows in the cracks of the sidewalks, along fence lines, at the edge of gardens, and some spend years trying to get rid of it before realizing that it might have been offering something all along.
It is time to dig into dandelions. So if we're going to start at the top, let's start with the name dandelion. Comes from the French dente de lion, describing the jagged nature of the leaf. Tooth of the lion is what that means. And then its Latin binomial, of course, the species is Taraxacum officinale. And as we know, any plant, when we see officinale or officinalis, that means that this herb has a long recorded history of use as a medicinal plant. And that's one of the things that's so special and wonderful about dandelion. We're going to dig into the apothecary, of course, here in a little bit. But even if we explore the history of the dandelion, we're of course going to have to talk about its medicinal qualities as well as use as a food source.
But, unfortunately, most people actually label it as a weed and as something that they want to get out of their yard. They cringe at the sight of dandelions in other people's yard. But what's interesting is the definition of a weed. What is a weed?
A weed is a plant that is not valued where it is growing, but it's usually of vigorous growth.
So we definitely can agree that dandelion grows vigorously, yes. But is it valued where it is growing? That obviously depends on who's growing it.
It's really all your perspective, right? It's such a funny thing to see, like you said, people getting so cringy and upset about seeing dandelions, these imperfections they might consider them out in their yard. But me, no, those of us that know, we get stoked. Dandelions are so useful. It's interesting. Let's think about the historical travels of the plant a little bit, because I think this kind of highlights how valuable this plant is and the shifting change in perspective that people seem to have over time. Dandelion is not a native plant here in North America. It was actually brought over here, and it was brought over here intentionally by early European settlers. Some people want to say they brought it over on the Mayflower. I saw that reference quite a bit, but we can certainly agree early 1600s definitely is when the dandelion first shows up here in North America. And it was brought here because it was so valuable as a food as well as a medicine. The early settlers actually cultivated dandelions intentionally in the garden, which is a funny thing for us to think about nowadays, right? Because it's the polar opposite. Everybody wants to get rid of it. But they intentionally would grow this plant in the garden, and dandelion thrives in disturbed soil. So it made itself at home very quickly. Every place that these settlers would go, they were disturbing the soil, and the dandelion started to follow them along. And then once established, it had no problem taking off, kind of taking over a little bit. Now, although it is not a native plant, it's not necessarily considered invasive, like some invasive plants, like if we think about like kudzu or something like that, that's really going to push other plants out of the way and take over that space. Dandelion's a little bit more polite. It's going to make itself at home, but it's not going to force out other plants in order to do so.
Isn't that don't they call it naturalized?
Naturalized, it certainly is.
So it wasn't native. It has become naturalized to our environment. It doesn't necessarily choke others out, but it's spreads freely and makes itself comfortable.
Absolutely. I think dandelion's journey across the continent, it really mirrors something larger, like we've kind of talked about here. It's a story about how human values shape the way that we see the world. A plant could be essential, and then suddenly it's ignored, and then it's despised. You meet so many landscapers that don't want anything to do with dandelions. But originally it was brought over here because people saw its value. And it's nice to see it's being rediscovered, and people are once again opening their eyes to the value of the dandelion, whether that is in our yard or sometimes in the corners of our garden.
Definitely. And, dandelion isn't typically cultivated, like Bevan said. You can, however, purchase seeds for it. I actually looked hard and long on the internets there looking for some interesting cultivars, which I think we'll talk about in a minute. But one of the things that is important is identifying the proper plant before you try to harvest it in the wild, or just identifying in general, are you growing the right plant?
Well, absolutely. And this is true for any plant that we harvest from the wild. Before we pick it, or certainly before we eat it, we should make sure that we identify it properly. And there are a few lookalikes that we're going to encounter when we're harvesting dandelions. There's a few plants that tend to look similar. They call them lookalikes, but once you really know some of the specific details that we're looking for, it's very easy to properly identify dandelion. So I got a list here that I put together of some of the most common misidentified plants that we might find out there. The number one is a herb called cat's ear, which is also actually called false dandelion sometimes because of how similar it is. This is the most common lookalike that we're going to encounter. And I haven't seen cat's ear here at Small House necessarily, but it definitely grows in Michigan. So it's pretty abundant. It's almost as widespread as the dandelion itself. So this is a pretty common lookalike. But the difference is here. Cat's ear is going to have hairy leaves, while dandelion leaves are always smooth. And cat's ear has solid branching stems, where the dandelion has single, hollow, unbranched stems. So those are dramatically different. Once you get down close to the plant and really look at it, it's easy to tell the difference between a cat's ear and a dandelion.
But the flower itself probably looks similar, and that's what would be so deceptive about it.
Exactly right. So from a distance, when you look out there and you see the little specks of yellow, you can be like, oh, those are dandelions. But once you get up close, you'll say, oh, maybe not, right? Chicory is another one. It's a common misconception that people might see chicory in its rosette stage. Now, chicory is obviously, once it makes its flower stalks and that sort of thing, it's a very, very different plant. But its initial bunch of leaves, its initial rosette of leaves is very, very similar in shape. But again, chicory leaves are usually hairy. They have hairs on them on both sides. And then they grow the super tall stem with blue flowers. So, I mean, at that point, you can't make this mistake. But early in its life, you sometimes can. And we'll actually talk a little bit about the chicory versus dandelion confusion here in a little bit. Another plant on the list here is wild lettuce, which has yellow flowers, again, like a dandelion, but it's got very prominent hairs on the underside of the midrib of the leaf. And dandelions, of course, like we keep saying, do not have that. They do not have the hairs on the leaves. And then another one, which we get here abundantly in our yard, actually, is the yellow hawkweed. Once again with yellow flowers, but these leaves, hairy, and lack those deep, jagged lobes that are found on the dandelion leaf. The shape of the leaf is very different, but from a distance, that little yellow flower is quite similar.
Those are the ones that are like tiny little yellow flowers.
Yep. Yeah, they're much smaller than a dandelion, really. Yeah. And we also have an orange version of it that looks like a little orange dandelion, I guess. But once you get up close to it, it definitely does it.
So the key there is just really looking at the stem. Is it smooth? Does it not have any hair? This is most likely a dandelion.
Right. And then the leaves are going to form a rosette. They have no hair. They're hairless, or maybe very, very small amount of hairs, but mostly hairless. And they've got that jagged tooth edge. And the teeth themselves actually point backwards towards the base of the leaf, towards the center of that rosette. And then it's a hollow stem. And when you bust it open, it's got that familiar milky white sap.
Okay, great. So we've identified the dandelion either in our yard, at our park, in the forest. So we know what it looks like. And if we haven't identified it, we want to look for it in places of full sun, disturbed soil.
So, that's why we see it so often in our gardens popping up, because we're turning the soil over there a lot. You're going to see it in the lawn, that it's going to be a place that it pops up. It's a perennial. So once you see it in a place, you're going to find it in that location, that exact plant, probably for years to come. But in that area, most certainly as it spreads, copious amount of seeds that these plants produce. Dandelion creates a very deep taproot. It takes a few years to establish nice taproot. If you find a young dandelion and you pull it up, the root system's pretty small. But once that plant's established, it's going to grow quite deep down into the soil. And I think that this is the thing to think about, because we want to talk about the value of dandelion, and we're going to talk about it in the kitchen, and we're going to talk about it in the apothecary. And these are the reasons that the early settlers might have grown it, and yada, yada, yada. But we could also talk about the value that dandelion has just in the ecosystem. Even though it's not a native plant, it is a valuable herb to find in a local ecosystem. It's what they call a biodiversity booster. It's very pollinator friendly. It's an early food for the bees. The large taproot improves soil aeration. So it works as a soil amendment. This root system that goes down pulls all of these minerals and micronutrients from down deep in the subsoil and brings them up closer to the surface, so then other plants have access to that.
So that's one of the reasons why they say to wait to mow until later in May. Let those dandelions grow. Let those flowers bloom so the bees have the early food. The root system are doing all the work to pull up some of that nutrients for the rest of your lawn. Even if you're just finding them in your lawn, it can help improve the quality of that soil. And so wait just a little bit longer to mow. Let that plant get more established.
Well, and it feeds the insects, which is important. If you think about this, I'd read somewhere that a dandelion will be visited by something like 90 plus different species of insects throughout its life. So that's like more insects than I can even try to imagine naming. I don't even know. So many different little buzzy buddies are going to come and visit these dandelions. And what those buzzy buddies mean is food for birds, right? So, insects, they say, are like the beginning of the chain of the food system, but it's truly these plants that feed the insects that then feed the birds that then feed the larger predators all the way down the line. So a plant like a dandelion is doing so much. It's improving the soil where it's laying, but it's also improving the entire world around it.
Yeah, that's pretty deep. Just like the taproot.
Oh, yeah. All right, so we need to start harvesting the dandelions. Another thing that's great about dandelion is every part of the plant is useful. Every single part of it is good for something, but we're going to harvest the different parts of the plants different times of the year, depending on when they're at their peak, right?
You always want to be aware of where you're harvesting. I mean, and if it's in your own yard and you don't spray your yard, then it's obvious and you know that those are safe dandelions to harvest. But if you are finding a field of dandelions at your local park, be sure that they're not spraying the grass there or spraying for other things in the area. Or is it next to a really busy road? Or is it, has it got a lot of traffic pollution or other pollution? So just keep those things in mind.
One important thing to mention here is if you find a large field full of dandelions, a good clue that it's not being sprayed is there's a bunch of dandelions.
That's true. Right now is a great time to think about harvesting the roots. So in early spring or late winter when the plants are dormant. So right now, depending on where you're at in the country, the plants are just starting to wake up. So if you can get them quickly, then they're still in their dormancy and that's when you can harvest the roots.
Right. When the plant's dormant, it's putting all of its energy down into the root system. That's ideal. Once the plants wake up and we start to see that new vegetal growth, the new leaf coming on, basically from that moment on through its life cycle, you can be harvesting leaves. We will find that the younger leaves are the most tender, less bitter, certainly the most delicious, but the leaf at any point in its life can be harvested and eaten.
Especially because it's going to be hard to harvest the roots unless you were really aware of a plant over the winter before it went to dormancy. Because unless you really knew it was there, it may be hard to find. So right now, one of the first things we're most likely to harvest this spring is going to be these leaves. So as you find these plants emerging from the ground, start harvesting those little tiny leaves and make them into all sorts of yummy dishes, which we're going to mention in very shortly in the kitchen. As you're getting the young tender leaves and as the plant continues to grow, it eventually soon will be producing flowers.
Absolutely. And you can identify that. We talked about how to do it. And once you see those beautiful yellow flowers, harvest them up. You want to get them when they're at their peak, of course. So the flowers are going to open. An interesting thing about dandelions, they'll open in the morning, they're going to be peak around noon, and then they're going to start to close up again. By the end of the day, they're going to be closed. So that's why in the afternoon, you don't find nearly as many dandelions. So you want to get them early in the day. Wait until the dew has dried. If you're going to be drying these flowers or anything to store them for later, you don't want that dew on there. But you want to get them when they're at their peak before they start to close up again. So, time is sort of the essence, with these types of plants, and dandelions, they have kind of a short window, not only for the individual flowers, but for the plant's flowering cycle in the season anyways. So got to kind of plan ahead. You got to get out there. So harvest them late morning is probably the best time to do it.
And mostly the petals are what you want in terms of flowers. The little green base, what is that technical term?
Sepal.
The sepal, okay, of that flower bud it can be a lot more bitter. So if you're drying them, you can dry it all together and then kind of peel the petals off later when you're about to use them. It might be easier to do it that way. I mean, or you could do it the other way around and pull off the petals and lay them on a screen with, small gauge on it so that they don't fall through and you don't lose them. Because obviously as the petals dry, they'll become very, very small.
Yeah, they shrink up quite a bit.
Yeah.
Let's also talk some more about processing the roots.
Yeah.
So when this airs, it's probably still going to be plenty of time for, especially those of us in the north, to be harvesting roots. But at any time that you listen to this and you're thinking about harvesting roots, it's important that we process them properly. The root holds a lot of moisture. And if we're just going to try to dry whole roots, they're probably going to mold and go bad. So I always recommend cutting them up right away. Wash them, get the dirt off them, and then chop them up to dry. And you can air dry them, which is like how you described air drying the petals, putting them out on screens, and that's perfectly fine. But you could also use a food dehydrator if you've got one to make sure they dry quickly before they mold. That's really nice. And then we're going to talk, when we get into some recipes and stuff, we're going to talk about some different root-based brews that you can make. And for those types of situations, sometimes it's really common to actually toast the roots in the oven. A little bit of toasting is going to coax a really nice flavor out of this root. So I'm going to recommend that as well. And you could just do that right during the processing stage if you want. So you can get your roots out, wash them, cut them, dry them, toast them in the oven. Low heat, very low heat so we don't overcook them, but just to give them a little bit of a golden brown type of a color. And then we can crumble them up into smaller pieces from there.
Sounds really good.
Yeah, it is really good.
Okay, so let's get into the kitchen actually.
Okay, so let's talk about the flowers first. Flowers are edible, but like you mentioned, the green base, the sepal, not so much. You can eat it. You can absolutely eat it, but it's going to be very bitter. If you want to eat the green base of the flower, what I'm actually going to recommend is harvesting the flowers before they even open, when they're still buds. You can harvest those whole flower buds. You can eat them that way. A really fun way to use them is to pickle them. Pickle the flower buds, then they're kind of like capers. In Herbs in Every Season, we did a couple of different recipes where we talk about pickling flower buds. We mentioned dandelions, of course. We did oxeye daisy. It's a fun way to use a flower that's a little bit different. But the petals themselves, once we gather them up, they make a beautiful garnish. I mean, that bright, pop of sunshine color. So you can just sprinkle them on salad. You can put them on your eggs. You can do, sky's the limit. You're only limited by your imagination with how you could use a flower as a garnish, I suppose. But they're going to make nice tea blends. We could take the flowers and batter them, fry them.
And typically when you're battering them, you're actually keeping that green part on too, right? You're batting them whole in the
Well,
umbra.
sure. But we're going to batter it and fry it. So it's not going to be so bad. You could batter and fry almost anything. And it's going to be...
That's true.
It's going to be pretty decent. You could take these dandelion flowers and infuse them in vinegar to make salad dressings and marinades. They add there's this bright floral flavor that they're going to bring to it, but that little bit of bitter is sometimes kind of nice as a flavor profile in a salad dressing. Or, of course, dandelion wine.
Yeah, a popular one. I think everybody probably has heard of that dandelion wine before.
Yeah.
All right. Now, what about the leaves? So we know that we're harvesting them young, like we talked about. And a great, super simple way is to add them to any of your stir fries, kind of like a spinach, or it's a mix between like an arugula and a spinach and a kale, somewhere in between there.
That's a good way to describe it, because it's got that bitter profile. It's that minerality that you're going to get from it. It's got a little bit of a bite like an arugula. So that's a good way to describe it. So you can use the dandelion leaves the way you would use any of those other plants that you just mentioned. Just wilt them, cooking. We did the wilted greens where you heat up the bacon, you pour a little of the bacon grease over the leaves to wilt those greens. Come on.
I can't wait for that.
I know. It's so good. What if we did a pesto?
Yeah, definitely. Anytime you could add any green, or doesn't have to be green, but any vegetable to a pesto-like blend, which is really just oil and plant material and some nuts, either pine nuts. A lot of times we use sunflower seeds because they're a little cheaper.
I would recommend if you were going to make a pesto and your main leaf was going to be dandelion, that I would blanch the leaves first. Put them in boiling water just real quick, 30 seconds, plunge them in some ice. And that quick blanching is going to take some of the bitterness out of the leaf.
Okay, good tip. And we actually did a really cool YouTube video many years ago, really at the start of our video making sometime during the pandemic, of us harvesting dandelion leaves and then turning them into a little mushroom stir fry thing.
Yeah, we used shiitake mushrooms that we grew here and garlic that we grew here. And then we got little bundles of the rosettes of leaves out of the yard, young, tender little leaves. A really cool video.
And, actually, we've seen dandelion leaves in bundles at some grocery stores. One of our favorite grocery stores it's an international store down in Cincinnati, right?
Jungle Gems.
Yeah, Jungle Gems, one of our favorites. But that was one of the first places that I've seen it at.
Well, so let's unpack that a little bit because, yes, Jungle Gems, shout out to Jungle Gems. If you're tuning in, we're looking for sponsors. Great grocery store in Cincinnati. You got to go check it out. It's super, super fun. They have all the food in the world. But let's get back to this. So sometimes you'll see bundles of the leaves, and they sometimes will say Italian dandelion or dandelion greens or red-stemmed dandelion. You'll see it under a number of names. But 9 times out of 10, the dandelion leaves that they're selling at the grocery store are actually a variety of chicory.
Interesting.
Yeah. And again, chicory leaves and dandelion leaves look very similar, but chicory leaves, especially these cultivated ones, are much larger. They're not as bitter, but you could tell if you look at the leaf. Remember how we just talked about identifying the dandelion leaf, that the tooth, the jagged part of the leaf will point backwards, whereas the chicory, the jagged portion of it will actually just point straight out, sometimes even forward. So if you really cared, you could take a look at those leaves and identify them. But either way, delicious, and you should eat them. You should go to Jungle Gems immediately and get some of these and eat them.
And check out your local store. You might be surprised that they're there with the other kind of bundles of herbs or spinach bundles, or right there by those bulk,
especially in
greens.
The spring.
Yeah.
Now let's get into the roots, the root of the matter here, the roots of the dandelion. So they have a flavor that's reminiscent of something that you just dug out of the earth, first off. So they are very earthy. There's a lot of mineral flavor here, which is why the toasting is really going to bring some additional flavors out, a little bit of more of a smokiness, more round flavor to it. So I do like to recommend that, but they're going to be perfectly fine even as raw root. You'll often see dandelion root included in recipes for coffee alternatives, and we did a few of them in Herbs in Every Season, different brews that involved different roots. A dandelion root ended up in quite a few of them because it's prevalent, it's easy to get, but it's also really delicious, and its flavor profile lends itself well to these different types of brews. I would include mushroom in some of these recipes, shiitake specifically, because that's what we grow here. But the earthiness of the mushroom and the earthiness of the root, I feel, go really well together.
Yeah, and some of the other traditional roots you might see included with dandelion in tea or coffee-esque like blends would be chicory and licorice.
When we were talking about this and we were kind of plotting out this episode and we were talking about taking the roots and making them into these brews, Heather says, well, that would also be such a good broth.
Yeah, and I did see a couple different broth recipes online, basically just adding the dandelion root to your soup broths as it's cooking, and it just adding that kind of umami, deep, earthy flavor and a lot of nutrition.
Yeah, I love this idea. So when you're making your stock, and you got maybe your chicken bones or whatever in there, and I like to add mushrooms to that for that same reason. Add in some of these roots into the stock, that's really going to not only bring in that flavor, but also all of the health benefits of the root. Yeah.
And this is such a weird blend of, the kitchen and apothecary is a hard blend in general. We are going to talk a little bit more once we get into the apothecary about the nutritional benefits of the different pieces of the dandelion. So stay tuned on that. But then you could put those roots right in your broths, or you could actually dehydrate them and turn them into more of a powder that then you would put into soups or broths or stews or things like that. So same idea, just how much, work do you want to put into it?
All right, so let's get medicinal.
Okay, so we're starting back at the flowers, and this is probably a great place for most people to start. Flowers are so easy to harvest. They're abundant. You don't have to dig them up. You almost sometimes barely have to let them dry before you use them in whatever apothecary-like method you're going to choose.
Sure. So we're most likely using dandelions for its analgesic property, which means that it's good for pain relief, right? So a topical application of an oil, let's say infused with dandelions, is going to be good for sore and tired muscles. But it's also really good for itchy, red, rashy skin conditions, so there has a number of healing benefits when we're going to utilize it topically. Let's talk about this fresh versus dried flowers in the oil. Dried flowers is probably best. The flower itself, the dandelion flower, it holds a lot of moisture, and we don't want to add moisture. We don't want to add water to our oil, right? Oil and water is not going to mix. It's going to go bad. But if we wanted to use the fresh flowers, we certainly could. But in that situation, I'm going to recommend infusing the oil in the crock pot, putting the herbs with the oil in the crock pot and slowly heating it for a few days. And I like to do this with the lid off because as it slowly warms, it's going to push the moisture out of the plant, which is going to help with our shelf life. I think that's an important thing to consider. We don't really want to put fresh dandelion flowers in oil because it's going to go bad.
We have a really cool YouTube video that kind of talks about the two different methods of salve making, of oil infusing specifically. Talks about the crock pot method, and it gives you some visualization so you can kind of look into that if you're interested in that method. All it really takes is just picking those flowers and letting them sit out in the sun that you're already picking them in. Let them sit out in the sun for a couple hours before you try to put them in oil.
So there's a lot of herbs that we could utilize in a formula like this. I mean, the dandelion is strong enough to stand alone and make a really nice oil, salve, or lotion. But we could also incorporate it with other herbs like plantain or calendula, chickweed, jewelweed. These are all great options, and many of these are going to be plants that we can also find the same time of year. So we can be working with all of these together. Jewelweed might come out a little bit later in the year depending on where you're at, but plantain, calendula, and chickweed are all spring plants as well. So we can gather them up and make some really nice topical oils from all of these beautiful herbs.
The dandelion is full of so many nutritional benefits as well. High in vitamin A, C, K. They're high in so many minerals like calcium, iron, potassium. I mean, I was pleasantly surprised as to the long list of nutrients in these dandelion leaves.
They're so good for you. But I mean, I swear you can taste it when you eat them. You eat it and you're like, minerals. You can't miss it for sure. It's like eating a kale leaf or something. Really adds a lot to that flavor profile. They're bitter. These bitter greens, they're so good for your digestive system. Even just eating them in a salad or sauteing them up, like we talked about, is just such a good way to just kind of get your system moving again. But we could also take these leaves and put them into a tea. You could dry these leaves and incorporate them into a tea, which is going to be really good for nourishing, supporting the immune system as well as the digestive system. So that's really nice. But if we're looking to harvest those minerals, I always recommend, if we're looking for minerals, that we utilize vinegar, just like we did in the kitchen. The overlap between the kitchen and the apothecary is tremendous. Of course, anytime we explore a plant, that's glaringly obvious that these two things they're really the same thing, right? So we could take these leaves and infuse them in vinegar, and that's really going to extract that minerality and bring that, of course, flavor into the vinegar. But all of those minerals that our bodies need will then be in there. And I mean, we could use it as a salad dressing or a marinade, or what if it was a tonic? What if we took this vinegar and made it into an oxymel? What if we had this vinegar and literally just did a shot of it, when we needed it? Those are great ways to take these herbs medicinally, because salad dressing's nice, but if we want something medicinal, we might need a longer extraction period. We might need a larger dose to really get that into the system.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love that. Okay, let's dig into those dandelion roots.
So what the root of the dandelion is probably most well known for is its detoxifying quality. So dandelion roots nourish and support the liver and the gallbladder. And these are the two organs that process all of the toxins that we encounter throughout every day. These two organs they're working overtime all the time to make sure that we're healthy and that our bodies are functioning properly. So if we can support those particular organs, that's going to do a lot for us for our overall health. And the dandelion root is going to help us do that. And we will see improvement in our energy levels. We're going to see it's going to clear up our skin. We're going to feel like pumped up, ready to face the day. And there's a couple of different ways that we can work with them. I think the one that I see the most often is a tincture, an alcohol tincture of the root. We do a dandelion root tincture.
Well, we just made it for the spring seasonal herb boxes, and I called it Revitalize because it really helps your body come out of the winter season, revitalizes it, and I really liked the combination of herbs in that.
Well, we can also use water extraction with a dandelion root. So the process here is known as a decoction. And so this is a little bit different than brewing a tea because we're working with a root. So this is an important thing to distinguish. When we're working with a root or a bark or a seed with a thick coat, these parts of the plant have a thicker cellular wall. So just steeping them in water isn't necessarily going to get the extraction that we want, particularly if we're looking for something medicinal. So decoction is what it's called. It's just essentially boiling. We're going to put the roots, the plant material, in water and boil it for some time. That's going to break down that cellular wall. It's going to get us a good extraction, and that's going to get us our medicinal brew. But even if we're making a delicious brew that we talked about in the kitchen, where we're working with these roots to make this coffee alternative drink, we're still going to boil them. Very generally speaking, I'm recommending boil it for about 10 minutes. Bring it up to a boil, turn down the heat, let it simmer for 10 minutes, then turn it off. I'll put the lid on the pot and I'll let it steep for another 10 minutes. So that's a 20 minutes of extraction time, but it's going to get us a really dark, flavorful, powerful extraction. And this water extraction isn't always a beverage that we're going to ingest. We can also use this topically, right? So we can take this brew that we make and use it as a compress for things like burns or even as a face wash.
I mean, really, it seems like dandelion has so many uses that, you may have been already doing something with dandelion, but there's something you haven't tried yet.
Yeah, there is so much going on with this plant. And I mean, honestly, we've been talking for a while and we've only really scratched the surface, I think, on the ways that we can use this plant. You had mentioned when we were at the top of the apothecary section here, utilizing the crock pot. And I just want to say, I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. All of these different YouTube videos or things that we've referenced, the dandelion tincture, whatever we're talking about, I'm going to put links to all of these things down in the show notes if you guys want to check that stuff out and learn a little bit more, explore a little bit further. You can find those links down there.
A plant we've labeled a weed, offering benefits in every form. And maybe that's the real story here. Not just what dandelion can do for us in the kitchen or the apothecary, but what it reminds us of. That sometimes the most valuable things are the ones we've been stepping over all along. So the next time you see a dandelion, don't reach for the shovel to remove it. Reach for it with curiosity instead.
And that brings us to the end of yet another show together. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We really appreciate spending this time with you today. If you enjoy the podcast, remember you can always show your support by joining our community on Patreon. You can find a link to that and so much more at seedsandweedspodcast.com. This episode was edited and produced by all of us here at Small House Farm. Thanks again for joining us, friends. I'm Bevan.
I'm Heather.
And we'll see you next time.